I changed how I'm titling these, so I'll start by just announcing what I'm working with at the beginning. And today we're on the Marvelous Mrs Maisel, Season 1, Episode 5, Doink. Before I begin the episode, there are a couple of things I wanted to add about previous episodes that I didn't think about until later. In the first episode, Joel goes through all 3 phases of a narcissistic relationship in a very short amount of time. But this does show what each phase might look like. The idealization phase, where it seems like Midge can do no wrong. The devaluation phase, which, as I said in a previous video, can be triggered by absolutely anything. And you see here, it's not even something that is even remotely Midge's fault.
Tonight, you understand?
Tonight, yes, I understand.
Archie and Imogen are coming, remember?
Of course I remember.
They're coming tonight, and I don't have a time. You know what? Cancel them. Tell them I'm sick.
Specifically, that their 2 friends are visiting Joel at the club. But after this point, suddenly nothing Midge does is good enough for Joel, and the perfect bubble around their marriage bursts. And finally, the discard phase where Joel just leaves suddenly. The other thing I just wanted to mention really quick, in the last episode I talked about the differences between overt and covert narcissism. I mentioned how the same narcissist can present as either overt or covert in different situations. And then I totally failed to notice that Abe, the typically covert narcissist, and Rose, the typically overt narcissist, are both acting like the other type when confronting their daughter at the end of the episode.
As long as you're living under this roof, my rules apply.
You could have been dead and dismembered in an alley.
Oh my God.
The Dion quintuplets would be very disappointed in you right now.
That's it. I've changed my mind. No Jack Parr for you. Because of your behavior tonight, I'm not buying you a TV. See, there are consequences. Lesson learned. Good. Now go to your room.
Anyway, course correction over. There are 2 things I wanted to talk about today. One is simpler than the other, so we'll do that one first. At the start of this episode, Midge gets a job.
Of course, where are you off to in such a rush?
I'm going to work.
What?
I got a job.
Why?
Though Abe seems to be impressed with his daughter for once.
You got a job.
Yes,
You have no resume.
they hired me anyway.
Do you know how to type?
I don't need to.
Okay. And it's 5 days a week?
Yes,
If it rains, you still have to go in.
I figured.
And you know how to get there?
By multiple routes.
Okay. And they're paying you
Yes,
in money.
yes.
By check?
Every 2 weeks.
You'll need a bank
I
account.
have a bank account.
Checking and savings?
Yep.
Okay.
Rose is immediately disappointed, so much so that she leaves the room. You see, Rose has always been a housewife, and she saw Midge as essentially a carbon copy of herself. Getting a job shows that Midge is a separate person capable of making her own decisions. Narcissists don't like change. Unless it's a change they have decided for themselves or others. Narcissists absolutely have to feel like they're in control of everyone and everything in their lives. Whenever something in the world shows that this is otherwise, they throw a fit, which can take many forms. What Rose is doing to her daughter is something known as the silent treatment, which is pretty self-explanatory. You're upset with someone, so you ignore them. But you notice there are a few good examples of how the silent treatment might differ with a narcissist to that of a normal person. For one, though Rose is obviously upset here, it's veiled in niceness when Midge talks to her again after work.
That's the key. Flats.
For what?
For what? For work.
You work?
Yes, Mama, you knew that. I told you this morning.
Oh, that's right.
Something wrong?
What would be wrong?
This is also a good example of passive aggressiveness in general. Here's the thing about how narcissists' minds work. They project all their bad emotions onto the people they are upset with, or their scapegoats. Which Midge is both to Rose while she's in the devaluation phase. So, even though Rose is upset, she can't accept the fact that her anger with Midge is actually coming from herself. If asked about it later, Rose would probably say something about how her daughter was being completely unreasonable, angry even. And that's really how Rose will see it. You'll also notice that Midge is now in Rose's devaluation phase. And everything Midge is doing is seen as negative. Even if Rose has to invent things in order to see it in this dismissive way.
I got you something.
You never have to get me anything.
I wanted to get you something.
What is that?
It's lipstick. I thought you'd like it.
Where did you get it?
My job at the makeup counter. At work.
Oh, yes, that.
It's a brand new color. It's not officially released till the end of the week.
So I'm a guinea pig.
No, you're the first woman in New York to have it.
You don't like what I wear now?
No, I like it a lot.
I think it looks nice.
So do I.
It smells funny.
But
Thank you.
What narcissists want you to do when they're giving you their own silent treatment is basically just roll over and give all the control back to the narcissist. The person with NPD doesn't really see you as even existing outside of what role you supply to them. Because of this totally broken view of the world, they actually think the silent treatment is one of the worst things they can do to anyone. They legitimately think that if they ignore you, you no longer exist. If they don't pay attention to what you say, you didn't say it. If they pretend the parts of their life involving you don't exist, then they don't. I mean, that's what they do with all their projection bullshit anyway. They pretend they don't have flaws, therefore, in their minds, they don't. Ultimately, their goal with this is that you accept that whatever it is they're upset with you about is all your fault, and you become the obedient dog they want you to be. The thing is, though, they often won't let you know what they're even upset with you about. That's for you to figure out. Okay, it's time. Let's talk about narcissists and empaths. Just like with everything else in this crazy world, there are two sides to everything. And just like narcissistic personality disorder represents extreme selfishness, there must also be an opposite representing extreme selflessness. And these people are what we refer to as empaths. This is because they have very high degrees of empathy, which is opposite to the narcissist who doesn't have any empathy at all. But this is empathy pushed to its most extreme. Okay, I have a lot to say about this subject, so much actually, I'm not sure where to start, so I'll just begin somewhere at random. Let's bring up this chart or line graph or whatever, and the people on one side are suffering from NPD who don't have empathy, and the other side are empaths who don't have hardly any narcissism. And there are degrees on both sides. People can be narcissistic without suffering from NPD, just like any empath can be selfish from time to time, and some are more selfish than others. But really, to be a normal and healthy person, you actually want to be right in the middle. You need a healthy amount of empathy just as much as you need a healthy dose of selfishness as well. And there are a few examples of healthy, normal people on the show too, like my favorite character, Susie Meyerson, who, for the most part, knows who she is and what she wants.
Like a Susan?
Well, no.
What do I seem like?
I don't know. Doug?
Seriously?
No, not Doug. Prunella, maybe.
Okay, how do you think this conversation is going so far?
She doesn't care too much about how most people see her, aside from her close friends like Midge and Jackie. She speaks her mind and seems to get along with most people as long as they share her don't mind me and I won't mind you attitude. Also, she doesn't pretend to be anything she isn't. Well, talking about all that didn't help me explain empaths, so let's start over. Just know something first. People don't really know where narcissists or empaths come from, and hopefully, scientists and psychologists aren't going to start abusing babies in order to find out. First off, people like to use the phrase unawakened empath for an empath who just doesn't know they're an empath, or different from other people in any way for that matter. What I'm describing here is a typical unawakened empath. Awakened empaths can change the world. Unawakened empaths tend to be lost in a sea of toxic people, unfortunately. Drowning in them, you might say. Okay. In theory, empaths are created in the exact same way narcissists are, usually through various forms of narcissistic abuse in very early childhood. Your parents or caregivers don't love you. Something children realize, at least unconsciously, when this happens. And there's two ways people typically go from here. You start believing you are unlovable and hide your true self. Start creating a mask and projecting what you think is perfect onto it, and you start suffering from NPD. Empaths go a different way, and instead think something like, I may be unlovable now, but I can change. I can become better. I can become lovable. I just have to be really fucking good. They start taking on the terrible things projected onto them. They see them as flaws within themselves and things that they can fix. And if they can fix them, then maybe they'll finally be accepted by their narcissistic parents. Oftentimes, they can become overachievers, constantly trying to do something that will finally show their awful parents that they have a right to even exist. Others can become underachievers, knowing that no matter what they do, it will never be good enough to gain acceptance. As an empath, you begin to see yourself as something broken. You may only realize this unconsciously, but your parents don't love you. Narcissists don't know how to love. In fact, they see emotions as a weakness, and one they choose to exploit in others as much as possible. They will never love you, or themselves for that matter. But if they can get you to love them, they see this as putting you right in their pocket. They own you, while you mean nothing to them. And the empath betters themselves to try to show their parents that they're really not so bad and have a right to be alive. But this isn't how it works to the narcissist, who will probably see any improvement on the part of the victim as an attack on them for never improving. Why would you improve something that's perfect after all? And you should therefore be punished for not just falling into the role they assigned you in. They will treat the empath even worse than their typical victim, and it will go on until the empath just gives up either on themselves or on the narcissist. Anyway, the reason they're called empaths is that they feel other people's emotions. This isn't in the way that normal people do, who you could say have a selective empathy. Empaths actually can't keep other people's emotions out. How they got this way is because their narcissistic parents' emotions were in such a state of flux all the time, it was the only way for their tiny 2-year-old mind to compensate. Just like narcissists, that's at least how early these things develop. And also just like people with NPD, empaths are this way their entire lives. Another thing, empaths tend to lack a strong sense of identity. For one thing, they've been taught their whole lives that whoever they are will never be good enough. So unconsciously, they reject themselves first, and then compensate by becoming the people around them, through something called mirroring. That's right, narcissists also do something called mirroring, but this is totally different mirroring. You see, as I said, narcissists and empaths are opposites of each other, and while narcissists mirror only the parts they like about you on a surface level, empaths mirror the real you, what's on the inside, and the more you hang out with them, the more like you they'll become. But this isn't like the narcissists who are trying to steal your personality because they don't know how to have their own, and then devalue and abuse you until you forget you even had a personality to begin with. For empaths, it's so they can figure out what makes you you, and then help you to grow and change into a better version of yourself. After all, unlike the empath's narcissistic friends and family, empaths have been bettering themselves for their whole lives. This helps the empath too. Your success is their success in its own way. Though it's somewhat parasitic, it can also be a very symbiotic relationship. The next thing I want to talk about is the love-hate relationship narcissists have with empaths. You see, when a person with NPD first sees an empath, they see them as a never-ending source of emotional supply. To counter that, unfortunately, empaths usually see narcissists as fellow empaths, but of course this is just narcissistic mirroring. This is something that empaths are particularly confused by when they quickly move into the devaluation phase. The reason narcissists will move empaths into the devaluation category so quickly is for a number of reasons. For one, empaths are authentic people, and people with NPD see authenticity as an attack on their perfect inauthentic mask. For another, empaths being empaths will start mirroring the narcissist's true self to get them to change, or at least try to make the narcissist learn things. The narcissist hates both these things. They don't think they need to change or to learn anything because that would imply they are imperfect. Also, being that empaths copy the true self, narcissists hate their true selves with every ounce of their being and are actively trying to hide that it even exists. How do you think they'll feel when someone is throwing it in their face like that? Thirdly, though empaths seem like good little dolls at first, filled with emotional supply, able to take on every projection thrown at them, and completely willing to become exactly like the narcissist, eventually all that emotional supply that empaths are filled with runs out. Oh, except for all those emotions the narcissist has been forcing the empath to suppress the most. Usually anger, rage, and the like, which all comes out at once after the narcissist finally pushes that final devaluation button in the empath. And then the empath blows up. It's the narcissist's projected inner rage all coming out of the empath all at once, all directed at the narcissist. This is something I've heard is called going supernova by people in the know about these things. Usually this ends with the narcissist running away from you and starting a smear campaign where you're a psychopath who went totally insane on them for no reason at all. Once a person knows that they're an empath, they can start building up defenses against toxic people and learn to hopefully be a bit more oriented on themselves. I mean, it's good to be helpful, but you should never be so helpful that you don't take care of your own needs first. Now, let's finally go back to the show and talk about the signs of narcissistic abuse, which I'll also combine with signs of being an unawakened empath, since most of these are one and the same. Alright, let's begin, which will actually jump back to the first episode as another course correction, I guess, and just point out that Midge, up to the point that she gets on stage at the gaslight at the end, is basically just a carbon copy of her mother. Narcissists just want their children to be them, and they glorify the traits that they share while devaluing all other traits. Well, unless you're their scapegoat, then everything about you is bad. Hypersensitivity to others' emotions.
Something wrong?
What would be wrong?
Self-sabotage.
Can you dim that? I mean, really, it's bright as shit. Okay, well, now the audience can't see me at all.
Doesn't matter.
Many people suffering from narcissistic abuse will suffer from idealistic thinking, to the point that they're practically living in their own fantasy world. Much like narcissists themselves are. They start thinking they can be more than they are, if they just try hard enough. This from a lifetime of being told or treated like you will never be good enough, so you're constantly trying to push your own limits beyond what you can do and then failing because of it. The scene also leads into excessive people-pleasing. Mrs. Maisel is doing her song and dance, but in front of what is obviously not her normal crowd. But it upsets her that she can't even get a single laugh, and the audience actively doesn't like her. This would probably upset anyone, of course, but many suffering from narcissistic abuse, especially empaths, feel they have to live up to everyone's standards at all times. This comes from living with completely unreasonable people who punish those they see as being in their pocket for living anywhere outside of their twisted version of perfection. Because of this, narcissistic abuse survivors start seeing any mistake they make as a failure. And failure of any kind can be very triggering, something we see in Mrs. Maisel immediately after this when she turns into a bit of a narcissist herself.
What is wrong with these people? They're unconscious. They're lying in state. And who was heckling me?
There's another comic up there an hour ago. He killed. Same audience.
No way.
Which is actually quite common among people suffering from narcissistic abuse. You begin to act like that narcissist who's abusing you, because you realize, at least unconsciously, that the more like them you are, the less likely it is that they'll abuse you. It's one of the reasons why empaths go around mirroring everyone, because they've learned that's how you deal with the world. Still on the subject of Midge's comedy, that's usually pretty funny outside of most of this episode anyway, what her sets usually exhibit is brutal honesty. But not just that, but what you might call foot-and-mouth syndrome, or maybe TMI disorder. I don't know what you'd call it, but it's another common trait of survivors of narcissistic abuse. Narcissists don't like your boundaries, and they hate when you withhold information, even though they'll throw the biggest hissy fit you've ever seen from an adult if you ever cross one of their boundaries. But to compensate these bad boundaries, the children of narcissists can turn into excessive truth tellers, unconsciously believing that people want to know everything there is to know about them, and they're liable to be accused of being a liar or abused further if they don't. Another abuse victim trait is excessive self-doubt, which is basically the theme of this episode of Mrs. Maisel. She doubts her own abilities so much after her failure that she hires a third-rate comedy writer who only helps her to bomb even harder than before. But as they talk on the phone, let's mention another trait of the narcissistically abused, and that's gullibility.
Bob Hope, Mom's Mabley, everybody uses cards.
Yeah, I've seen comics use cards.
It's fun for the audience to see a comic working like this.
Midge naturally trusts pretty much everyone. Another reason she's such a prime target for people with NPD. They want their main supply to just believe whatever they're telling you despite all the evidence to the contrary. The quicker you are to trust them, the easier it is to manipulate you. This comes essentially from childhood innocence. You completely love your parents, and you can make believe they love you too. All you have to do is trust all their lies and ignore all their negative actions against you. You imagine that this push-pull relationship, constantly switching back and forth between idealization and devaluation, is just your parents' way of showing they love you. This becomes your own twisted view of what love is supposed to be. Oh, and this is called a trauma bond, by the way, and being accustomed to this is yet another reason people with NPD are attracted to empaths and other people with traits of narcissistic abuse. Another thing that's exemplified here is idealism. Mrs. Maisel gave her joke book to the comedy writer and expected him to go through it to write her act for her, but he didn't, and instead sold her the same jokes this con man sells everyone. But because Midge is so trusting, she assumes he did what she wanted, and this idealism and trust is why she fails in her second set in this episode. And it's completely through her own self-sabotage. And I guess that's the last trait I'll talk about in this video. Narcissistic abuse survivors are notoriously bad with failure. Again, this is a trait given to them by their narcissistic parents or partners, because failure, especially public failure, is one of the worst things a person with NPD can experience. And since the victim is seen more as a doll that the narcissist owns than anything else, your failure reflects poorly on them, and they will punish you for doing it. Because of that, many narcissism victims will develop a complex, you might say, against failure, and one of the many reasons they become over and underachievers. Narcissists also have this complex, but you'll notice exactly how they differ by seeing how Joel, the narcissist, reacts after bombing, by blaming everything on Midge.
You told me to talk about my sweater.
I know. I just thought you'd put it into some sort of joke form or something.
and then how Midge, the narcissistic abuse survivor, reacts, also by blaming everything on Midge.
I needed help. So you hire a guy that'll work for Salami?
I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. I don't want to do it.
You're fine. So you're not going to do this? No. You're giving up? Fine. Go get your purse.
Okay, she also gets kind of mad at Susie for rushing her on stage, but you notice her language is a lot of statements devaluing herself and her own abilities, but, and this is something that empaths are very good at while narcissists are completely awful about doing, but by the end of this episode, Midge has brushed herself off and is trying again. Even if it's in a safer environment than before, it's still a stage in its own way. Narcissists tend to just give up in the face of failure. Empaths might get extremely upset at first, but they'll learn from their mistakes and give it another go. You really can't keep a good empath down. Not forever anyway. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for watching the video. Please like and subscribe.